There's no doubt the New World Order changed wrestling forever. The black and white helped usher in the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars, but that war was eventually won by Vince McMahon, and by then the NWO had faded from its original glory. Just because WCW died didn't mean they didn't have another run in them though, but the one we got just kind of flopped. That all changes on today's show. Welcome to Rebooking the Territory podcast. This is the podcast, the show where I, your host, Luke Thayer, take you through old wrestling storylines, plots, careers, runs, shows, whatever it is, where me and a guest, we come on and we change it to what it should have been. Back in the day, what should have really happened instead of what actually did happen. Today, my guest, he's a return, he's a member of the family now. The Rebooking Territory family. He's been on MTV, Fox. He's been in the New York Times. Jesse Jones, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, buddy. It's very good to see you again.
Absolutely, yeah. It's always fun to catch up. Yeah, don't remember if we said this in your first episode, but we go way back in terms of comedy. We started performing years and years and years ago together. Mm-hmm. We've done more than our fair share of shows together over the years. We're separated a little bit now by distance. We used to be very close and now several states away. So this is a chance to catch up, especially with touring not going on this past year, as we've been more isolated. This is probably the best way for us to catch up. And the best way to catch up with a comedian is to say, I've got a wrestling podcast, and you book 100% of the people you ask when you say that. So
very true. Every part of that's very true. I remember back in the day, it would not 2 weeks would go by without me seeing you, your significant other, or somebody in our various circle. And now it's very odd to only come together on projects, It's
very
weird.
much so.
It's weird not just sitting in the back room of a club shooting the breeze.
Yeah, that's what it almost feels like after graduation, and you say, "Oh, we're all going to stay in touch," and then you go, "Oh, well, I guess I'm only going to see Jesse when I need to buy a house because he's a real estate agent now." And so,
right. I heard Luke's a plumber. I bet he'll know what I should do.
Right? Yeah, we go way back, so this will be the chance for us to catch up, and then you don't see the person again until you break your toilet. So. That's the stage of comedy life we are in now. Right. We're middle-aged comedians.
I was going to say we're comedy middle-aged.
Yeah. So very cool. Well, today this is actually a topic that you suggested, but had been on my mind a bit, which is we're going to talk about the NWO. And people were like, "Oh, we love the NWO." Well, we're talking about a very specific era of NWO. The NWO in the WWE, WWF/WWE, the World Wrestling Entertainment Company, Titan Sports, that Vince McMahon owns. And we're going to target it. It's so good, right?
It's so good. There's so many things that could have happened here, and literally everything went wrong in this angle. Like everything that they thought and maybe should have even foreseen. It's almost like they ignored the rules of regular wrestling booking that they shouldn't have, because everything that could have gone wrong with this angle did.
It is amazing to look back at this. And, I think you and I need to kind of rewind, not just for the guest, but ourselves, just to remind ourselves the passion that maybe the NWO originally inspired in the fans, in the wrestling world in general. So, in the mid 90s, when they show up, 96, 97, when it really starts to take off, the NWO, what was your wrestling life like at the time?
Oh man, all in, not to quote WWE pay-per-views to give emotional disposition. But when the original NWO broke, it was right at that time frame where you were watching, you were watching both. Like Hogan had shown up on WCW. You already were watching WCW because they had Flair and Sting, and they were doing some super interesting things, albeit getting a little old. They didn't have anything really new. They were still working that 80s gimmick. And the WWE, same thing. You had Hall and Nash, and you didn't have Stone Cold yet. So it was like you were playing in Kittyland almost, as they were still doing those tugboat-esque storylines where Duke the Dumpster Grossi would be fighting Doink the Clown, and kind of that we were outgrowing what we had grown up with at that stage. Absolutely. Of the original NWO.
For sure. Yeah. I think that my wrestling life is similar to a lot of people around my age, is that I got into wrestling Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania. Mm-hmm. Hulk Hogan was my favorite. That's when I got into it. Ultimate Warrior was huge at the time, but I'm a loyalty guy. I felt like I had to pick one at that stage of my life, and I had picked Hogan. And so that's who I was into. Now, by the time we start hitting him going over to WCW, which I think he joined WCW, Hogan, that is, around 1994 or so.
He had just come off of the scandal with the WWF and had literally, you could go back and you could make the argument, had perjured himself on Vince McMahon's behalf to get him out of that whole steroid scandal that was going on at that time. He had retired from professional wrestling. He was off. He was shooting Thunder in Paradise. I can't believe I remember that. And they bring him in, and it was sort of a no-brainer that they bring him in. I mean, he had a contract with TNT. TNT had a contract for Nitro. I mean, it sort of made sense, or they offered him the show with the contract. Like, it was the Hollywood angle was real in that he went to WCW almost to continue pursuing the acting persona. And,
yeah, absolutely.
That didn't fix any of the problems, because he was still, by the time you've seen him take on Iraq at WrestleMania 8, or I think WrestleMania 8, what else can Hulkamania do? It was as played out can be.
Yeah, it had been, it's difficult, because I understand the position that Hulk Hogan or Terry Bollea would be in, of you've made all of this money, you're really the biggest draw probably ever. At least at that point. There's arguments between him and Stone Cold, but the biggest draw, because not that someone like Bruno Sammartino wasn't a huge draw. It's that things were still regional.
Right.
Hulk was the first national and international superstar wrestler that had broken over to mainstream as well, where he's showing up on Regis and Kathy Lee, or he might be on the Tonight Show. And there's a celebrity factor that comes with it.
He was a star. I mean,
absolutely.
He was definitely the premier athlete of sports entertainment back when it was still wrestling.
Absolutely. And even saying that when it was still wrestling, he broke into the business. It was broke into the business as one of those old school guys. He has his leg broken on, first day of training, just to get him out, and he comes back, and you learn to protect the business. Things are kayfabe, and he said this many times, that the champion made more money in these territories. So for him, being the champion was a shoot, meaning that it's real. Like, maybe it's all predetermined, but being the champion means I make more money, and therefore that is real to me. There's no fake to it. There's no, oh yeah, let me just do a job for this guy because who cares? Things are a little different now because there's guaranteed contracts. It's
right, which he's also responsible for.
Yeah, well, really, all of what the business has become, Hogan has, at the very least, set the foundation for. Totally. Guaranteed contracts, lots of money, T-shirt money. Before him, I'm sure they were selling stuff, but like he started selling like Hulkamania shirts. I think even in the AWA.
Yep. That
And
was one of the first real arguments him and Vern Gagne got into, because he had these shirts made and they sold out, like selling them out of the back of his car, and they sold out. And again, with wrestling history, you've kind of got to take one person's opinion with a grain of salt, because this story does come from Hulk himself. So he's always gone into business for himself a little bit when he retells history. But as the story goes from him, he had sold these shirts out of the back of his car, brother, and he gets back to the arena the next night, and Vern Gagne has printed up his own Hogan t-shirts and is now selling them at the arena. And of course they sell out, and Hulk doesn't see any of that money. And so now him and Vern are at odds for the first time, which kind of, however it goes, was one of the factors coming into him wanting to leave, was little things like that, where he had the opportunity to make big money on a national stage with McMahon.
Absolutely. And, right there is almost an episode in of itself, of which we are going to go back and do an AWA.
Good Lord. Because you can rebook the territory so hard with AWA, because all it would have needed to do is take one step to the left and it could have competed with Vince McMahon forever.
Yeah. It's one of those where it's like, I think Vern Gagne was probably a visionary in his own right, but couldn't see past his own limitations.
Yes.
And
well said.
In limitations in vision of not seeing where the future was going. Even like a little bit of that ego of going, I'm going to sell these t-shirts. I have the right to sell these. I own this property, rather than going,
you're mine.
You're mine. And if you don't like it, walk. I think is probably his viewpoint. The problem is, once Hogan walks out that door, there's not another Hogan coming in.
No,
you can wrestle Nick Bockwinkel until he's 75 if you want.
He'll let you. He wanted to,
and he would. And that's not to belittle Nick Bockwinkel. It's just to say it's not 30-year-old Nick Bockwinkel, right? And so and so that is the type of wrestler that foundation was laid before you and I even started watching.
Agreed.
Then we start watching, and we're seeing him at his apex, just the absolute peak of Hulkamania. And for me, it never really died down. My fandom didn't go like, oh, well, he's not as hot right now. I just had the other wrestlers that were my favorites in other ways. I found like, creative ways, maybe some mental gymnastics in order to get other favorite wrestlers. So my favorite tag team wrestlers, or my favorite intercontinental champion, or my favorite WCW wrestler, when he was still in the WWF, and my favorite ECW when that eventually, I would just start going, there was different categories in order to, it's kind of like the way that they do with the championships now, is that you can have 12 different belts floating around, and they're all champions or world champions, but they're not, none of them actually mean the top guy.
Right.
So
unless it's Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar somehow seems to cement top guy status, whichever belt he holds.
Absolutely. Well, he's one of those classic guys of somebody that brings something to that belt and doesn't necessarily gain something by that belt.
Yeah.
He's going to seem real everywhere. So that's kind of where I was with Hogan. And so obviously what you were saying, which is, Hulkamania in 94, 95 was starting to just die down. And I was getting a little bit older. I actually stopped watching wrestling. I was in maybe junior high at this time. And it was just kind of like, we're not watching wrestling as much. We were going out and playing basketball. At least I was, I'm from Indiana. So of course I was playing basketball, and that's where I was spending my evenings and free time always. When I was a little bit younger, I couldn't get the basket, the ball up to the hoop really. So, that's not one of the major things. I watched my brothers and stuff play, but
still, as you grow up, you grew out.
Yeah, you grow out and you find different ways. And even, obviously it's not about basketball, but just saying like, as you get older, things that were not open and available to you as a child start to open up and become available.
Right. Yeah.
So I imagine you had a similar thing where it's like, okay, now I'm in junior high, I'm doing something else or getting involved with things.
It for my town, it was a very small town. So there were actually a faction of guys that stayed with it. And specifically a couple of my friends, like Nick Freitag, that dude, he could tell you anybody in any timeline in any company, like he was all in, and he was like a couple years older than we were. So by him being all in, that kept us equally in. And I remember we would go over to like right when you were stemming away from your house and you were going to other people's houses, we were going to his house and watching pay-per-views, or this is all the way up to driving. Like I think the NWO hit when I turned either 15 or 16. And so we would just drive over to Nick's house, and, you know, I hated my nickname because of all the people in the NWO. Jesse Jones, who do you think I get stuck with?
I hope, and this is not who it is, but I hope it was Scott Norton.
I would have loved Scott Norton. That would have been phenomenal. Anything's better than Double J.
Of course you're going to be Double J. Like, I didn't want to just be the obvious choice. I wanted it to be like not a top guy, but still like you were big in Japan.
Yes, yeah. I was huge in New Japan back in '96.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's it's. I had the guys that also stayed with wrestling, and we had been friends when we were a little bit younger, and then as we were getting into high school, we were starting to take a little divergent paths. I was a little bit more academic than those guys.
Right.
But what kept us together was they never stopped watching wrestling. And we started, and it really was the NWO, the Monday Night Wars got us to bond back together, because, when we're a little bit younger, it could be comic books or it could be something like that. And then as we're getting a little bit older, this felt like a more teenage appropriate version of wrestling than, like you were talking about, the characters. Like even Ultimate Warrior, he wouldn't have fit in, and he didn't fit in this era.
They proved that.
Yeah. And it's amazing. It's a testament to Hulk Hogan's abilities as a storyteller and a guy that can change. The fact that he comes in and he becomes, I think, one of the Mount Rushmore of heels.
Right.
After being on the Mount Rushmore of baby faces, just the absolute top of the mountain you can get, and transformed himself and reinvented himself into something completely different, bringing in an audience that maybe had gone away.
Well, and again, this all goes back to Hogan's story. He will tell you that he wanted to go heel in WWF, and that Vince just was adamantly against it. He saw too much money in Hulkamania to let Hulkamania go heel. And I kind of believe him on this one, because if you look at the history of Vince and the history of once you're babyface, damn it. And you're going to sell t-shirts in green and purple and all the color of Fruity Pebbles. You know what I mean? Like I kind of believe Hogan on that one. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Hogan was able to be, he has two spots on Mount Rushmore, one in yellow and red and one in black and white, which is unheard of, considering how short an attention span the avid wrestler watcher has today.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because there are people that would, obviously over the years, people go back and forth. But you look at somebody like Ric Flair.
Right.
He was a baby face, but what's he really known for? His heel work.
Yes. Even when he was a baby face, he was a heel. Like he was, you liked him because of his heel persona. He never did. When he got older, he cried a lot, but even when he cried a lot, he could still drop to his knees and crotch shot you,
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and there are other examples of people that kind of were able to do both very well. Macho Man is one of those guys where it's like he could do both. Piper could do both, but those guys, I would say, neither their babyface nor their heel work was as transformative of the business as Hogan was in both cases.
Totally. Well, that is because they never reached the top of the mountain like he did. I still think Piper's heel work is up there with some of the greatest heels of all time. His babyface work was only ever up again. Like I don't remember him being a babyface up until he went to WCW to take on Hogan's heel. He had various babyface. He was Roddy Piper. Like you liked Roddy Piper because he was Roddy Piper. Like when he didn't hit Brett in the head with the ring bell and it cost him the Intercontinental Champion. He was still technically a heel in how he handled that. He was just a Roddy Piper heel. He was his own brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as we've spent a lot of time on Hogan.
Yeah, I know, right? We're rebooking the NWO and WWF. We're sitting here giving the A&E biography of Hulk Hogan.
I know and the thing is, and maybe your friends felt this way too, but I think a lot of my friends and the people I was surrounded with that were wrestling fans at this time really thought that Hall and Nash, the outsiders, were cool. They thought they were the cool heels, and they did not think Hogan was cool at all.
No.
And they thought he was, and I've heard, both Hall and Nash in interviews talk about, we're trying to do this new thing and we're this young generation, and Hogan continues to go back and do the old baby, the old heel promos, and we're like, hey, let's tone it down. We're doing this new thing. And he'd go, okay. And then he'd go right back into the thing. But
and that makes perfect sense. I remember that.
Right.
When you hear that interview, you know that they're telling the truth, because the two of them are sitting there in black and white, looking menacing on a black and white video, and then Hogan does it for like 2 seconds. Hogan would smirk at the camera with like that Hogan smirk, and then he would go straight into replace something Hulkamaniacs with something NWOites or whatever he replaced it with. He hadn't learned a damn thing. He just painted his face from the nose down.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I would almost say that looking back on it, I don't think the NWO would have had the impact that it had if he didn't do that. Like if
sure.
Right. Because, and I think at the time, Hall and Nash probably be like, stop doing that. We want to be, cool heels. But I think even Hogan going, yeah, I'll do that, brother. And then not doing it was probably him going, okay, sure, you can be the cool heel, but if you really want heat, you have to brag off stage, and then you have to beg off in the ring. You have to talk a big game and then be a coward. And so if you do the opposite, if you're just, hey, we're just too cool for school, and then in the ring you beat everybody up, well, you're not really a wrestling heel. You're not serving what the storyline needs.
There's no drama. And also, if Hogan hadn't have done what he did, that transition over from babyface to complete heel, which he wasn't the first one to do. Baby faces had gone heel throughout every territory that's ever existed. That's how you create new storylines. He was just the biggest. And by him doing it, and I like what you're saying there, because if he had gone and been brooding and not done Hollywood Hogan, it would have lasted 90 days, because you can only go so far with characters that don't give you anything to work with. By him creating a parody character of himself, even if he didn't mean to, I think in Hogan's mind, he was, now I'm a bad guy, brother. I'm going to do the same stuff I did. It's just going to be in black and white. So by him doing that, it creates that transition for our generation, because if we hadn't seen that to that level before, I don't think you would have Stone Cold if you hadn't had Hogan go heel, because
Absolutely.
that gives Austin that he thinks that's how a babyface heel works. I'll show you how a babyface heel works. And then that's where 316 comes from, is now you've got a bad guy who is a bad guy, but you love him because the bad stuff he's doing is all the things that an anti-hero does.
Yeah, and it's even bringing in Stone Cold in that, I think this is an era where these guys that had been in the business, you know, Hogan had been in the business a decade longer than Steve Austin had, but still, they both were kind of old school, still territory guys. And so, you know, for a long time, I forget who would say that, if it was Brian Pillman or someone else would say to Steve Austin behind the scenes, "You're a babyface," and he goes, "No, I'm not. I'm a heel." And it took him.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I'm a heel.
All you got to do Austin is try to sound like Elvis eating something.
That's perfect. Yeah, Elvis eating one of his peanut butter and bacon sandwiches and bananas. So that's great. You know, and that's the thing. He would be saying it like that. He would be saying, you know, "What are you talking about? I'm a heel." And I think it took him probably, you know,
ECW.
Yeah, it took him a little bit into the run to go, "Oh, wait a second. I'm not a heel.
Right.
I'm a babyface. Even though I'm acting like a heel, I'm actually a babyface because times have changed."
And he fought that. Like, it was his decision, or he really politicked to get himself to turn heel that second or third time against The Rock at Mania, and it just didn't work. Him as a heel, you can hit The Rock with a chair as many times as you want to. That's not what the people wanted at that point. And McMahon was just cocky enough to think he could tell the people what to want, and they would want it. That's the P.T. Barnum in him. But you know, it goes to show sometimes that persona is bigger than your wants.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, and that's the thing. Audiences always ultimately determine what is they're willing to buy. And I think that's why, you know, kind of bring it back to us as kids and teenagers, is that the audience, we were changing and they changed with us. Right. And it was something where now I'll start watching again. Hogan's he's a heel.
Hogan's a bad guy.
Yeah,
bring it on.
Right. And I stayed a Hogan guy. I was an NWO, and I was still in Team Hulkamania. And so that kind of, you know, we don't want to spend the whole episode here just rehashing that.
No, NWO. I think it takes us to where we're going perfectly, because what was the one thing you wanted while Hogan was in WCW and Steve Austin was blowing up in the WWF? You wanted to see Hogan versus Austin. You wanted to see Hogan versus The Rock. Like, because right when they were coming up, the NWO was tethering off a little bit, but there was still that period where they were neck and neck, and it was Hollywood versus the Rattlesnake and the Brahma Bull. And I completely understand why McMahon would bring them in. WCW had folded. You've got all of these great talents with brand recognition just sitting, waiting for their contracts to expire so they could get off the Time Warner money train and come on the Vince McMahon, probably a little bit less hat in hand money train. And that's what he does. And everybody, the thing about this is one of those angles that nobody wanted to have happen except for probably Hall, Nash, Hogan, and McMahon. Like the locker room was adamantly against bringing these guys back, because remember, before they left, there was the super faction, the behind the scenes political faction of the Clique, and they sort of they ramrod Team Ramrod across the landscape of the WWF and made a lot of people miserable. So they didn't want them back, specifically Kevin Nash. And why would Austin want to risk? Why would Jericho? Why would Rock? Why would any of them want to risk bringing back the Mega Maniac? It was even one of his names, wasn't it? Weren't him and Savage the Mega Maniacs? Like why would you want to bring that back into your life?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, just looking at the roster, so we're just jumping forward for the audience here. We're jumping forward to the 2002. Yes. That's when we're getting the NWO. You know, WCW folded. It's been bought up by Vince McMahon. It's a year, you know, plus that he's owned this company, own WCW.
You've had the invasion angle come in and fail.
Yes. And to be fair, it was, and there's an episode about this on the podcast here of rebooking that WCW era, but it failed because they didn't bring in the top stars.
Yes.
You didn't see Ric Flair. You didn't see Sting. You didn't see Hogan. You didn't see Hall and Nash. You didn't see Scott Steiner. You didn't see these guys come in. That would have been an invasion.
Foresight being 2020 or hindsight being 2020, Vince had the money. He couldn't have done it with all of them, but he could have said, Goldberg, what are they paying you? Mm-hmm. I will give you that. Just come in now. We want you versus Austin. If you could have had that, if you could have done, because Goldberg or Sting, that's who they would have needed to come in to make that invasion angle an actual invasion, because those were the WCW guys. Even Scott Steiner, he had been a WWF guy. You had to have somebody that had never been on the flagpole.
Yes, and those would have been great. Just to splurge a little bit. And obviously, I'm not sure exactly when the company went public. I don't think it was public until, the 2000s here,
right.
But when he gets money hand over fist. Yeah. But, like you said, hindsight, just knowing what he was going to end up being a billionaire and throwing $1 million away, quote unquote, would not have been that big of a deal, because he was going to have to pay them anyway. Let's be honest. If you brought in a Goldberg, even if it was his contract had run out and you didn't have to worry about anything, you were still going to have to pay him, $1 million a year or something like. It wasn't going to be like, oh, well, I know you're making $1 million over in WCW, but now that you're here, it's going to be $50,000. It's like they're going to have to pay him. And so.
And Sting, look at the merchandising alone. If you'd have brought Sting in, let's say Sting's making $3 million a year in WCW. He's got $3 million left on his contract, and you bring him in, you pay him. Okay, I'm gonna pay you $3 million to get you out of your Time Warner deal, and I'm gonna top it. I'm gonna put another $1 million. I'm gonna give you $4 million to come over right now. You make that back in toys and video games and T-shirts. You make that back in half a year.
Yeah, and that's something where now maybe I've heard Sting talk before that he was hesitant to go to the WWF because he saw the way Booker T was treated, some other people, but it's still, I think that if there had been a push like, no, we really want to make this work, because that financial investment would have said, hey, we're going to sell toys and we need to sell T-shirts. So we need you to have a big push, because if we don't, then we're not going to make that money back. So let's, actually invest into this guy.
Well, and Booker T comes up in a minute as well. I love Booker T. I think he's great on the mic. I think he is an underrated worker. But he's not Sting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Booker T coming in as the only dude willing to cross the picket line was not enough.
Yes, correct. He would have been a great number 3.
Yeah. If you're doing because remember they did the draft at that time. They went back. They had a few drafts. Booker T would not be your first draft pick from WCW over to WWF.
Right.
You'd already cherry picked the middle tier, going to be huge star guys in Benoit and Guerrero and Saturn and Jericho and all of them. You already got those. Those are your money makers that you plant in the ground and wait for them to sprout a tree. But if you're bringing over people right now, NWO would be above Booker T. You could have run that entire invasion angle, never done the invasion angle, and just done NWO comes in immediately following the demise of WCW, and you could have rebooked that entire angle a year in advance.
Yes. And so, even thinking about NWO again, so they're coming in, and it's this whole thing with Vince McMahon and Ric Flair. You own part of the company, I own part of the company. Oh, if I can't own the whole thing, I'm going to kill my own creation and poison the well.
I'm going to inject it
with cancer.
Yeah.
That was the promo. He says
Yeah.
he's going to inject the WWE with a lethal dose of cancer. And he turns around and has NWO written on the back of his chair. And
Yeah.
there, as dumb as that sounds to say out loud, as at that time, and by that point, I would have been probably 20 or 21. I marked out. I completely marked out at the thought of the original NWO coming back to WWF, which is what he wanted. That's why he did it. That's why he is P.T. Barnum.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, to me, looking back, it says a lot more about the excitement of them coming back than the actual storyline we were being presented.
Yes.
And so,
1,000%.
I almost want to just throw the whole thing out. I'm just going to throw this whole thing away the way it was presented and start fresh. The only thing that I have to have out of any of that NWO run is WrestleMania 18 Rock Hogan, because that's my second favorite match of all time.
It is. It shows how good both guys are, because they pivoted mid-match to the crowd. They both listened to the audience. I think it's your second favorite match because it's stand-up comedy. They had what they thought was going to happen. The crowd gave them something they weren't. They knew in the back of their mind that it could happen. The crowd gave them something and they went with it. And the rare wrestling match is the one where both people come out stronger for the finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Agreed. So we got to keep that. We got to keep Hogan Rock.
Right. And so anything that I rebook has to keep that in mind. But I'm going to bring them in differently. And you'll tell me in a second whether you like this or whether because you've probably already thought this through and you have your own way of bringing it around. They're presented, was it a pay-per-view? I think it might have been.
No Way Out.
No Way Out. They just kind of.
NWO.
Right. And they wrote. Yes. And they've already been presented. By Vince McMahon of like, they're going to be coming, they're going to be this cancer, they're going to be this poison. And so when they come out, they just stroll out to the music. It turns black and white, which that's a cool entrance if it isn't their first time, because that's not the way that they were presented in WCW. That was the entrance that they had, 6 weeks in, they started getting that entrance of like strolling out. Everything's black and white. We got the music. Everything's polished up. Now we know what we're doing. So for this, I do not want Vince McMahon to mention them. I don't want anything hinting at this. I just want, and it could be No Way Out, but I actually would even think maybe the Royal Rumble. Yeah. Which is a month earlier than that No Way Out.
The Rumble makes a lot of sense.
And they don't come out the same way. Like they don't just come out, oh, it's number 15. Oh, it's Hollywood Hulk Hogan. It's number, 15, 16, whatever number. And it's a blank screen, no music. And they're like, what's happening here? And through the crowd comes Hall and Nash, because that's kind of the way. And then Hogan comes out with the music through there, and it's a complete shock. Like, it's the NWO here, so he's the actual official entry into the Royal Rumble, but they come through the crowd, and they're coming through the crowd first to kind of like signify where people are kind of, the camera's looking over. It feels guerrilla style. You've got,
don't you think you give away Hogan too easy if you do that? What if you flipped it? What if you had Hogan come out in the yellow and red at the complete John Cena Triple H number 30, like the thing where people are already annoyed that he's there because that's such a Hogan thing. Because we've smartened up a little bit at this point. We knew that Hogan was a bit of a holder down, like whether he was or was not. My Southern comes out from time to time. He wasn't, whether he was or he wasn't. The fan mentality would be, oh great, here comes Hogan at number 30 to steal somebody's top spot. And he comes out and it looks like we do everything you just said, only they come through the crowd as Hogan's about to lose that Mania spot. And whoever is the crowd favorite at the time, I can't remember who it was. He's about to throw Hogan over, and then all of a sudden, here comes Hall and Nash. You get the announcers in on it. The announcers are like, wait a minute, wait, what? No. That doesn't go with yellow and red. What are those two doing here? And then they throw out the guy, and once again, you have a very fake, like they ham it up hard in that, ooh, we pulled one over on you guys, and boom, the NWO's back.
Oh, I love that. I love that little twist to what I had just said, where it's turning him again.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
almost
even
like a triple turn, because
right,
the crowd turns on him as soon as he shows up.
yes, that 30 spot. You know, I like that with him winning because of them.
Oh, of course.
Like he's throwing out somebody at the end because they interfere. They come in and they all throw them out together. All three of them throw Austin out. And we've seen in these Royal Rumble matches, I can't even say, I believe I said Royal Rumble match, because to me, I know I've said this in many episodes, it's the Royal Rumble.
Yes,
and
agreed.
There's the Royal Rumble pay-per-view if you're going to add a suffix to this thing. But in the Royal Rumble, we've seen where rules kind of shift a little bit, where it's like, well, there's people get involved.
Yeah.
Somebody now there's like this past Royal Rumble, I think there's a guy on the outside helping AJ Styles.
Yeah.
And so them just coming into the ring, all three of them, and beat him up. And technically, Hogan is the one that puts his, like, they've got him up. You got Stone Cold up, and he just puts like one finger on and pushes him over. So technically, he's the winner.
Oh, that's beautiful. Like I can see it in my head right now. Like you've got Austin. He has beaten down Hogan so hard that the NWO come in, or Hall and Nash come in, and Hogan's beat down in the corner. So they never actually touch Hogan because it doesn't look like he's already dealt with. They don't have to do anything to him. And they take the boots to Austin, and then Hogan gets up, and same thing he did the last time. You think he's going to take off he's going to defend Austin and fight off Hall and Nash, but nope, they get him up for the power bomb, or however they're going to throw him over the top rope. And I love that little, because you could do a play to the finger poke of doom there too, where Hogan just gives him one of those and finger pokes him right over the top rope. Oh, absolutely. I love that. Oh, that's beautiful.
There we go. And so, that starts that. And it's possible then. Now, I don't know that you could talk Steve Austin into doing this, but it's possible then, if you do this at the Royal Rumble and you have that kind of entrance into this, that you could do a possible No Way Out Hogan versus Austin. Stone Cold. But the only worry I would have about that is I don't want that getting in the way of WrestleMania 18 with The Rock.
Right.
So I think it's very possible to then just say, you know what, we're going to stick with that plan. That's kind of in the back pocket, where, in the back of our mind that they've got a beef with Steve Austin. So
How about this? Instead of, how about we're rebooking this thing? How about we leave Austin out of it completely? Let The Rock be number 20. Let him be one of the last guys in when Hogan comes out at 30. Completely save Austin for WrestleMania 19. You don't do any Scott Hall Austin. You don't try and do an outsider Austin. You do a straight up build Rock versus Hogan from Royal Rumble through WrestleMania.
That's not too bad. Like that kind of keeps it kind of extends that whole Rock thing. Cause they did it right away anyway, but like still it kind of, it gives you another month of it.
Right.
So now you've got, instead of just from No Way Out to WrestleMania, which is only a month, you've got 2 months of this build.
Totally. And think of everything they did in that month. They were able to not only introduce them, make the match, they were even able to have Hogan run over his ambulance with a truck, which I'm not doing. I'm not doing that in this rebooked territory. You're not going to suspend disbelief immediately by killing the other person fictitiously.
That is something that there was more than one instance of that happening at the time, where somebody was essentially killed and then they would show up a week or two later and everything's fine. So I'm completely fine with throwing that out. So now I think we can almost just go streamline this to WrestleMania 18.
Yes.
Everything's there. And the only thing I want to do is I wouldn't mind dropping a hint or two about, are these guys really fully together?
Right.
Are they really,
build a little bit of discord?
Right. Are they fully into this is the direction that we want NWO to go in? And so that WrestleMania 18 turn, because essentially then they're beating him up, Hall and Nash are like beating Hogan up, shortly after you didn't win, that kind of stuff.
We lost our match, but yeah.
And I don't like that per se.
So with that, maybe you do give the Outsiders a match at Mania, and you give them the tag titles.
Yeah,
like you set it up like that, because the way they were so dominant at the beginning, they had all the belts. They had the tag titles. I think they had I think Six-Pac held the cruiserweight title. Hogan had the championship. Maybe we make this thing. I know Vince booked it to where you could have two main events. You had Hogan and Rock, and you had Triple H and Jericho. Guess what? They had to follow that. They had to follow Hogan Rock. What a waste of a solid pay-per-view. What if you put the belt on Rock? Or what if you know what I mean? So that you had that, because you could then build your storyline like you're saying, where, all right, Hogan, brother, I see that look in your eye. We're not here for them. We're here for us. We're here we're the NWO. We're not going to just go out and I don't want to see that right there. I don't want to see any of the poses. I want to see you focused. Mm-hmm. We've got a job to do. We're going after the tag titles. You're going after the main belt. This is what we got to do. Get your head in the game and sow that discord that way, as you put it.
Sure. I even like that. I like that. And I was even thinking of how to add an extra layer of discord is that, and this can be post WrestleMania 18. I just wouldn't break them up immediately. No. It's something where we can sow that seed of like, that WrestleMania thing's now another thing where Hogan lost his, but they won theirs. They're the tag team champions now. And then afterwards, it's kind of like, well, we got to get stronger here. And so what we need is to make the faction bigger. And they did that, but I want to do it in a very specific way.
I want where you're going with this.
You probably do.
I like this.
To me, I want a merging of NWO and DX.
Yes. And
so that they're essentially becoming the clique, but you have multiple members there that can start to question, what's Hogan doing here? But you've got, obviously they bring in Shawn Michaels because that was a big surprise. So I think you can still have that big surprise of Shawn Michaels. He's kind of resuming his in-ring career.
Had to.
Yeah.
They had to bring in Michaels because as soon as they put the boots to Hogan, Hogan turns face and leaves. I think he went over to SmackDown.
Yeah.
Then Nash, I can't remember. I know he tears a quad to get out of the group forever. That's what it was. Originally, he tore like a pec or a bicep or something that only required a couple months to fix. And that's when Shawn Michaels was brought in because it went really quick. Scott Hall went to AA. Kevin Nash went to the emergency room and Hogan went to SmackDown. So right out of the gate, if we're rebooking this thing, I think you've got to rebook it to where Scott Hall is not still battling demons and Kevin Nash is in better health than he was.
Yeah.
We're rebooking it. We can pick the parameters how we want to, because losing both of those members and Hogan a month after it debuted or a month after Mania, it was dead in the water. They brought out Shawn Michaels as they had Booker T.
They had
Ric
the Giant,
Flair.
or I always call him the Giant, the Big Show.
Yep. He was in the NWO, so he was the Giant again, let's say. Six-Pac. And for some reason, Ric Flair. I never understood why they put Ric Flair in the NWO It just all it reeked of desperation. I'm 100% with you. I when I was thinking about this last night, I was thinking exactly what you just said. How do we get DX and the NWO together? And the way I thought was exactly what you just said. You put them in there, you make it look like they're all going to fight. You don't grow it by Big Show and Booker T and Ric Flair. You keep it Pac, Hall, Nash. They're trying to figure out what to do without Hogan. They start DXing it up a little bit. You think you're going to get like a DX versus NWO, and then you get a Click reunion where there is no NWO or DX anymore. Now you've got a third faction, the Click, and the Click is already known at that point. So the Click can then just take over.
That's great. I love that. I like the idea because the transformation of the groups into like almost like a merging of a company.
Yeah.
To come out with a separate identity is great, because that's not something that occurred to me of just making them a separate identity. But I think you have, and it's a great way to kind of separate Hogan out of there. Is
totally, and it's organic. The whole thing is organic, and it plays to the marks.
Right, and you're not one of us. You're not Shawn Michaels. You're not X-Pac, and I want Triple H in there. It's those three extras, and you can even have like a Billy Gunn, a Road Dogg type of thing where they're around. They're kind of the Scott Norton role in the back, but they're guys that can the reason I want those guys around for the Click,
depth.
The depth is to go out, take bumps so that you can get Hall and Nash. They can kind of do the tag team thing. They're taking about half the punishment they would normally. Mm-hmm. Also, maybe surrounding Scott Hall with some friends that actually have his best interest in mind, especially someone like Triple H, where it's like, you're riding with me.
Yep.
Keep him maybe in a better state of mind, a healthier state of mind, to be able to move forward with that. It make this last a little bit longer, because he was in a rough place for a long time.
He was.
And so, and then even if they don't last, let's just say they get hurt, it's not the killing of the NWO, because it's the Click now. Yep. It can move on. It can exist without those two members, and it can.
And think of all of the months of television you can get as you build that up. Like just the initial release of them combining. You just think of how they all thought themselves to be very funny. So just think of the backstage antics you could see where, all right, if we're going to do this, we're going to come out to the ring to the DX thing. And then like halfway down the ramp, they stop it and they start playing the NWO thing. And like just that little bit of like strife that you could see there as they basically cut heel promos on one another while building to some sort of grand escalation between the two. And then just the butterfly that is the Click that comes out of all of it. And you've got your classic faction. You've got Triple H as the champion, because Shawn Michaels wasn't wrestling yet. That was the other thing that hurt him coming back into the group. Can't have a leader that can't take a bump. Yes. He would then take on that J.J. Dillon, miles ahead of JJ in terms of charisma. He wouldn't just be a manager. He would be the JJ Dillon of their Four Horsemen. You'd have the Outsiders as your tag team, Six-Pac as your cruiserweight, and Triple H as the champ. I mean, and that's the Click is already branded. You wouldn't have to do anything. Yeah,
that's great, because now we've got that portion of it taken care of, and I think that's going to take you well beyond the year. I think you got with those guys, you got 2 years of storylines just with those guys. Now, on the flip side, you can tell me what you could have strong opinions against this if you want, but for Hogan, I still want there to be kind of a reckoning between the Click and Hogan, like a feud that's happening. Yeah. And in order for there to be, I love the kind of the rebranding of the Four Horsemen with those guys. Now, for me, this is just a thought that I had with this, is to change the whole dynamic of Hogan there. And so he can go on be champion as well, because he does that in singles. At some point he becomes, what Mr. America, all of those things.
Yeah.
But I see him having a faction, kind of like forming a babyface faction that can compete with the Clique for at least a short period of storyline time. And I envision it with Hogan, Flair, Piper, and this is the piece de resistance of it all, is Macho Man.
I was going to say it had to be Savage.
Yes, and you have to convince all parties involved to get involved here, but that gives you another surprise, because Piper is in WWE. Like a year later anyway, because it's him and Flair tagging at some point. They're tag team champs. So these are actual friends behind the scenes, except Savage might be, you've got those four guys. So then you almost have this main event mafia type of feel to it.
That's where,
and then, gosh, you could even, if you needed like an extra pushover, let's say you can't get Savage, you work really hard to get one of two people, Sting or Goldberg.
That's exactly where my brain was going. It's got to be, I don't think you need, if you're going to have, because Flair's still wrestling, Piper makes sense, Hogan makes sense, Savage almost makes too much sense.
Yeah.
Like Savage is almost, it's too easy. I think you could bring Sting in and have that be, because Goldberg at this point, we've seen Goldberg never plays well when put in a scenario. He was their Ultimate Warrior. He was better than the Ultimate Warrior, but he wasn't a talker. He wasn't a long-term ring performer. He was half of the match was his entrance,
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely.
It was, if you brought in Sting, then you've really got something, because you've got the added appeal of a surprise. Mm-hmm. And you've got the added appeal of somebody that's never been there before. So, and he doesn't have to talk at first. You could bring in Crow, Sting, and Hogan and Flair can be, and Piper. Good Lord, who else would get a word in if you had the three of those? It would be a 45-minute promo where they're just going, you know what? Like just every part of the promo goes, well, let me tell you something. You know what? Woo! I mean, good Lord, it would be like auto-tune.
Yeah, I know that at different points these guys have worked together. Not all of them at the same time and whatnot. The Savage part is really, that's pie in the sky dreaming, because as we know, Macho Man never returned to WWF in any form at all
until his posthumous
right. And even that took a long time. That took a long time before that was even, involved in the Hall of Fame. So essentially from whenever, 94, 95, when he left, it was done. And so
he literally had to die to get brought back in.
Yeah. And they had to really let that corpse cool before they were even going to do it then. And so it's something where, gosh, could you get everybody involved to, I don't know what kept Macho Man. There's rumors of what kept him away, which
the rumors are rumors. Which we both know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. What was factual was Vince also never forgave him. He was hurting for money. He was at the beginning of hurting for money when Macho Man left, and by Macho Man taking Slim Jim advertising dollars with him, that was like one of the most lucrative endorsement deals that the WWF had, and Savage took that with him to WCW. So Vince saw it as like a double backstabbing, because he didn't just take his own talent over and rehash storylines that McMahon always thought he owned. He thought he owned those storylines of Hogan versus Macho Man, but he brought Snap into it with him, and that was just like another blow to the Federation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
could you call them that? Could you call them the Federation?
That sounds more like a Star Trek reference when you say it like that. Like different nerd podcast, Jesse. So yeah, and gosh, let's just say, all right, we'll get Savage involved. Maybe you just have to have Slim Jim call up on his behalf and try to get that all worked out. But yeah, that's probably not going to happen. And so I think that Sting, that version of Sting that gives you a surprise, it gives you some strong WCW presence and vibes that wasn't there before. It kind of allows you to skip over the invasion, but that had happened a year before, and kind of reintroduce a different version of an invasion, where it's like they're not coming in to fight WWF. They're in here to fight the NWO. It's kind of like this older generation versus this newer generation, even though the NWO or the Clique would not be new or young, other than Triple H is kind of just now hitting his peak.
Right.
And then that gives you, it gives you storylines for your, then you also have you can have Hogan, McMahon, Flair, McMahon, Piper, McMahon. You can go on that in that end of storylines. You can have the Clique with
Stone
or without
Cold, The Rock,
Stone Cold,
Jericho,
The Rock.
Benoit. We've not integrated our storyline with anybody else. So you've still got all of those storylines happening while you have a very, very top level main event storyline taking place. So Brock Lesnar, good Lord, you've got all sorts of things that hadn't even touched one another yet. And you've already got a long-term version of the most dominant force in the 90s wrestling scene on your roster fixed. We did that for you, Vince. We fixed it. You're welcome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can you imagine? Because we're about to get into the era where we're going to have Brock Lesnar for a couple years. We're going to have John Cena for the next decade.
Oh, I didn't even think about Cena. Think about all of those legends interacting with Cena at some point. Kurt Angle. Absolutely.
Yes. Kurt Angle.
Hardy Boys. You've got so many matches you could make right there.
Absolutely. You've got a lot of fun stuff. And, Scott Steiner's going to be coming in shortly too, which he's got a thing with Triple H, which instead of it just being Triple H, he could be having a similar type of going against the Clique, but maybe it's him hooked up with the Godfather or something else that makes sense for what he was doing at the time. And
totally.
So yeah, I see all of those different storylines, and it really pushes, to me, it kind of pushes the Attitude Era forward in a way that we didn't get to see, didn't get to see this transition, because I feel like the transition was rocky because they call it Ruthless Aggression Era.
Yeah.
But really it was, other than John Cena saying Ruthless Aggression on TV, what was any different about that? It was just, they're trying to figure out how to change, from that rated R superstar type of era, the Attitude Era, into a PG era. But it's a weird, clunky transition, and having something like this, where it's almost a visual and emotional transformation we're getting to have with the Clique, from NWO changing into the Clique, and kind of a fracture, changing into the Clique and also changing into this version of the Main Event Mafia, or something along those lines, where it's like the classic, the heroes are back for one last run. Almost like a Western.
I was going to say, like Tombstone. You've got Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp staring down at the villains, at the Cowboys.
Right. And it gives those guys one last good run where Hogan can get the championship like he does, and flip it around a couple times with people. Flair and Piper can do the tag team championship, which they did.
Yep.
It gives Macho Man a chance. I still kind of go back to Macho Man, but it gives
it's the easiest puzzle piece to put there.
I'll give both versions. It gives Macho Man a chance to come back into the family, have that final run that he never got,
and deserved. I think he was a good worker, man. He was not done when he left. When he was sitting commentary with the frickin' string, the plastic strings on his arms, that was not the best iteration of the match.
Exactly. And so, but take him aside, it would also give Sting a prime run, not 15 years later, where it was like you're dealing with a man that's physically, who he didn't know he was physically done.
Yeah.
But, going against guys almost half his age.
Yeah.
Where just physically that the demands are tough, where we saw that with his neck.
Yeah.
You get a much
Rollins.
younger Sting, right?
Yeah. And then you could set it up. I mean, we can crescendo this whole thing with giving people what they've always wanted. After everything has run its course, now you've established Sting on WWF television. Once the Federation breaks up, then you can finally put him into a program with The Undertaker where you're not feeding him to the Taker. You have 3 or 4 years of him in the Federation to build his own name recognition in Vince's eyes. And when The Undertaker beats him, because let's be fair, Sting was never going over in that match, ever.
Right.
Then it doesn't destroy the character because he's got years of wins and losses to help build his credibility so that one loss at Mania doesn't make his career, which we saw. I still don't know why they let Triple H beat him, but I don't know. Egos are still egos. In this rebooking of the territory, there has to be a zero ego. It's only our egos that matter. Their egos are kind of pushed to the side.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is a great crescendo, a great way to think about this transition. Obviously all those guys weren't going to be long for the wrestling world anyway. They were, but instead of a year run, really, it wasn't even a real year run. Let's be honest.
No,
they had a couple months.
Yeah, at best, at most.
Right. And then the rest of it was just throwing stuff against the wall. Oh, it didn't stick. Well, move on. And I think that it could have been something that bridged the 90s wrestling world to the 2000s wrestling world, giving us a smoother transition, keeping more of the fans that were kind of lost in all that shuffle, kind of transitioning to a PG version, especially if you're bringing back a version of that 80s superhero, where it's like, now we can go back to that. Now John Cena can be that for you guys.
Yeah.
And not have this clunky transition where we still now have bra and panty matches and then following it up by, something else that's for kids. It's like, it just didn't mesh as well. So instead you can kind of
clunky.
Yeah. Move on beyond that. So,
and we've not changed too much. Like, all we have done is really make it a smoother transition from one to the other, utilizing talents that were already there or were already going to get there at a better. We're just using them without them in the way of themselves.
Absolutely. And we've also sold a lot more merchandise because you've got a whole couple other sets of figures. You've got the Click figures, the NWO figures, the DX figures, and on the other side you've got Hulkamania, you've got NWO Hulkamania, you've got the Western version of Hulk Hogan, the main event Mafia type of thing. You have Sting figures. They've sold tons of merchandise all over those years.
Picture that if they had a set of, because you could do it both ways. If you start going that storyline, you could have a whole run of DX and NWO shirts. You could have a whole run of NWO and DX ring gear. The possibilities are endless with what you could do from a marketing standpoint. And you've just captured back all of the mid-20s people that you lost when you did all of this to them at 23.
Absolutely. Well, we changed the course of history. Who knows what is happening in 2021 if we had done all this.
I
but
bet
Jesse,
there wouldn't even be a pandemic.
We ended the pandemic. Like,
we did.
All of this was because COVID-19 happened because the NWO failed nearly 20 years earlier. So thank you for being on the show again, Jesse. You can follow Jesse at Jesse Jones on Twitter. Incredibly funny guy. And hopefully as things are starting to open up now, he'll be able to perform in a town near you. Jesse, thank you. And I hope to have you on here again, just so I can talk to you.
I was going to say, I always enjoy this. I feel like this isn't too far off from what you and I talk about off camera anyway.
It's just, hopefully getting an audience with it this time. So.
Hey, thanks for having me, Luke. It's always so good to see you.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. Do you agree with our booking? Would you do it differently? Well, I'm at Comedian Luke on all social media platforms, and you can actually at Rebooking TT on Twitter and Rebooking the Territory on Facebook. You can also find out about future episodes there. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and please give us a 5-star review. It truly helps.